in global supply chains on minerals and diamonds. This is Elena Bombes, advisor on supply chain sustainability at the UN Global Compact. Next slide, please. So just a couple of logistic details before we get started. If you have any technical difficulty that you would like to raise, please type a message in the question pane A that you see on the screen. The Q&A session will take place at the end of all presentations by our panelists. The agenda will be presented in the next slide. Please feel free to send us your questions throughout the webinar by using again the question pane A that you see on the screen. We will note down your questions and then ask them at the end of the webinar. Please also remember to specify the panelists to whom the question should be directed. Next slide, please. Now let's look at the agenda. First, we will have Ms. Tara Norton, Director of Advisory Services at BSR, a global non-profit organization that promotes social responsibility for businesses. BSR is also a member of the UN Global Compact Advisory Group on Supply Chain Sustainability. This is a group of companies and organizations that work with the UN Global Compact on issues and guidance material for businesses on supply chain sustainability. As part of the advisory group, BSR has led the Traceability Task Force, and as a result of the work of the Traceability Task Force, BSR developed with the UN Global Compact a guide to traceability, a practical approach to advance sustainability in global supply chains. BSR today will present the guide and introduce also the main elements related to traceability for minerals and diamonds. The remaining panelists will provide a quick overview of their work and then address two specific questions on traceability in their sectors. We will start with Dr. Fiona Solomon, Director of Standards Development at the Responsible Jewelry Council, a not-for-profit standard setting and certification organization dealing with responsible business practices for various commodities in the jewelry sector. Then we will give a floor to Mr. Terry Heyman, Managing Director of Gold for Development for the World Gold Council, an organization that comprises leading gold companies, and he will talk about the conflict-free gold standard. As for traceability for minerals, we will pass on to Arvind Pandey, General Manager at ArcelorMittal, a multinational steel and mining company, who is also a member of our advisory group on supply chain sustainability. Following up on the presentation, we will have then Adrian Gardaz, the Policy Advisor and Program Manager of Business for Peace, a multi-stakeholder platform launched by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon that is focused on aspects on which business can have for the greatest positive effects on peace, including also taking measures on responsible sourcing for their raw material. Finally, we will have a Q&A session, which will start with special remarks from Jonathan Dreamer, Vice President and Deputy General Counsel of Barrick Gold, the largest gold mining company, and also a recent member of our advisory group on supply chain sustainability. I believe actually this is the first official introduction of Barrick Gold as a member of our advisory group, so welcome Jonathan and Barrick Gold. Now, because we have a very full agenda, without any further delay, I will pass the floor to Tara for a presentation of the traceability guide. Tara, can you hear me?
Hi everyone, I can hear you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today. So moving right along to the agenda for this section. Really, it's great. We're going to hear from some folks who are obviously specialists in the industry in which we're talking about today, and the commodities that we're talking about today. And so I'm going to just set the scene with some broad context in terms of our perspective from the development of the traceability guide with the UNGC. So what we're going to hopefully start with is just learning a little bit about what traceability is and how it can be a useful tool for companies and their sustainability objectives. I'm going to go over a little bit in terms of the different traceability models, and I'm going to just highlight the 7 steps that we put in the guide that you can take to practically implement traceability. give a quick overview of the global traceability schemes. Of course, we're going to hear more about that from our panelists later. And then I'm just going to do a deep dive looking at minerals and diamonds in terms of, from a high-level perspective, what we saw as the key issues and opportunities. Next slide, please. Right. Just to start very simply, the definition of traceability, it's in the guide. But we're talking about the ability to identify and trace the history, distribution, location, and application of products, parts, and materials. And the key here is about ensuring the reliability of sustainability claims in the areas of human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption. It's really taking the fundamental definition of traceability, but thinking about it in the sustainability context. So there's a purpose to it here, which is about enabling us to understand if what is being said about a particular product on the sustainability front is actually the case. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip this slide, actually, if we can move on. Just a brief history. Traceability has been around for a while. And where we are today is just a bit of context. It's an increasingly useful tool for companies to advance sustainability and improve claims and attributes of sustainable products. I think what we're going to be talking about today is, hearing from some of the initiatives that are out there, and what we found in the development of the guide is that, while some companies have instituted their own traceability programs, they tend to work better if they're joining up with existing multi-stakeholder initiatives. That actually there are lots of initiatives out there already focused on traceability of key commodities or products, and joining up with those leads to a better outcome for everyone. Next slide, please. So traceability is proving impact, but there is definitely more to do. I think one of the great things that we saw in the development of the guide is that there is more data available in terms of how much of a particular commodity. So if you take timber as an example, how much of that commodity or product is certified of the global amount available. So FSC or PEFC certification is available on 11.8% of global timber. And currently 10% of world's forest areas are, the other way around. 10% of the world's forests are certified sustainable, either FSC or PEFC, and the growth rate is 11% a year. So you can see that we are having impact. If you consider those definitions of timber traceability to be strong ones, then that is obviously creating impact. And the goal of having certain commodities or products 100% certified is absolutely a valid drive that's out there. Obviously, though, we still have a ways to go. Looking at the opportunities to strengthen traceability, one of the big ones is, I would say, that third bullet below, which is reducing the cost of traceability for all supply chain actors. And I think hopefully that's something that our panelists might comment on later. But the reality is, due to the complexity of supply chains, and certainly the supply chain we're talking about today for minerals and diamonds is very complex. It is hard to understand who's going to bear the cost of ensuring that traceability at every step of the way. So more systems and technology that can enable that, and more collaboration along the way will certainly help, but there's definitely a question of cost. Next slide, please. And apologies if you can hear drilling on my side. There's a bit of drilling in the background, but hopefully it's not too loud for you. So one thing that was really useful, and the more we take this guide around, the more we get feedback that it was useful to do this, is that there are actually different kinds of traceability models, and really breaking down what we're talking about can help in terms of the conversation and in terms of identifying the kinds of model that you might want to implement, or that you might want to have implemented by a commodity initiative that you're engaged in. So one is product segregation, two is mass balance, and the third is book and claim. And I'm going to go into each of those briefly. Next slide, please. No, I'm not. Can you go back a slide, please? Sorry. No, back to the slide with the, yeah, there we go. So I'll just touch on these quickly. Sorry, I thought I had a supporting slide for each of them, but that must be another presentation. In terms of product segregation, essentially is about ensuring that the item that is certified to a certain standard is actually segregated from non-certified items all along the path. And that in some ways is viewed as the most desirable form of traceability, because then you absolutely know that that item carrying a particular certificate or a barcode or some evidence carries it, or a bill of trade that accompanies it, it carries that all the way through the chain. But obviously that can be quite difficult to implement, and for certain commodities or products it doesn't work as well as for others. So that's the first one. The second one and the third one are about ensuring that what is put in and what comes out at the other end are the same. So mass balance is saying that is applicable generally for commodities that are mixed. So you'll know that, for example, sustainable coffee, you'll know that a certain percentage of a truck of coffee beans is sustainable, and you'll keep that through to the end of the chain. And book and claim is a similar process where at the beginning you book a certain percentage of product as sustainable, and then at the end you're able to claim that in the same way. Moving on to the next slide, please. So the other thing that, and I'm hoping the panelists will comment on this in a bit, in terms of looking at best practice in traceability. There's a model that's in the guide that we would like to really kind of drive home to people who are looking and considering traceability. There are three parts to this. First of all, that there should be an independent multi-stakeholder global collaborative scheme focused on that particular commodity ideally, or that particular product. And that enables a focus at a global level on this particular commodity. And that leads me to the second point, which is focus, that the traceability scheme is focused on a limited number of issues in terms of the number of commodities and the attributes that must be traced, so that you can ensure that there's again, a degree of focus throughout the chain to kind of limit the complexity. And then finally, that there's appropriate collaboration along the supply chain, so that the actors along the chain are participating in the scheme, but it's in a manner that's appropriate to their position in the supply chain. One thing we've seen is, companies often are pushing back for their own purposes to see as far as they can down a chain. And as we know, there will be times when that gets very difficult for commercial reasons. So having a global collaborative scheme that is overseeing this actually kind of enables the companies along that chain to play their appropriate role and share data with an independent body, as opposed to further down the chain where it might get a bit more complex. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, I'm going to just focus on a couple of key points here. So in the guide, we talk about the drivers and benefits of traceability, what's driving it, and what are the benefits that you as a company get out of it. And I think if you look at the third column, regulation, I think that one can be quite obvious. There's obviously increasing regulatory pressure to be demonstrating compliance, and having a traceability system enables you to do that in some ways. I think I just want to focus a bit on the first column, which are the values and efficiencies. One thing that we've definitely seen in terms of companies that are looking at traceability is, well, there's the reputational benefits, which is number 5 in that column, certainly, but there are also some more commercial benefits to be had. So if you look at number 3, securing supply, this can be a way of, if you are tracing your supply chain, then in certain ways you are going to identify where you want to shore up relationships, and where you might have, where there might be areas of your supply chain that you need to focus on. So it enables you to identify places where you would like to secure that supply. So that's just, there's a number of drivers and benefits. Those are the few I just have to focus on. Next slide, please. In terms of guidance for companies, I think many of the attendees to this call today are thinking about what they're, hopefully are thinking about what they are going to, or how they might implement traceability within their company. So we identified 7 steps to doing this, and we hope this is a straightforward process, and obviously beneath each of these steps is a lot of work. First of all, identifying key commodities. For those of you who are on the call, you've probably already done that because you're on a call about minerals and diamonds. The second step is gaining an understanding of the relevant sustainability issues for those commodities and identifying whether traceability is the best way to mitigate those risks. And I think the benefits we have here are there's already so much going on globally in this area that you can actually understand those issues quite readily. Develop the business case for traceability, and then number 4, take action. And the key here is if there's an existing traceability scheme, get involved, and we're going to hear more about those that exist in a moment. And the key for us is, don't necessarily start your own thing. Actually join up with the global efforts that are in existence, because that's how we'll create common messages and actually create supply chains that are traceable. And then the next steps are really about what you do internally as a business. And number 7, staying the course is really key. And in the interviews we did for the guide, every company that we talked to talked about the importance of, keeping that commitment over time, and that the companies who can now say things like, a near 100% of a specific commodity that's important to them is sustainable or certified sustainable, or that they can trace it, are companies that have been working on that issue for a number of years. Next slide, please. Right, and so before turning it over to our experts on this topic, I just wanted to share at a high level what we identified in terms of the key issues in minerals and diamonds, some of the relevant actors, and then the gaps and opportunities that we saw. So again, this shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone on this call. But first of all, I just want to clarify, I was asked by UNGC just to clarify that diamonds are a mineral, obviously. And the reason we classified it this way is just so people could see up front that, diamonds, when we're talking about minerals, we're also talking about diamonds. The key issues, that are out there are non-conflict, diamonds and human rights. Human rights being a major concern, prevention of forced labor, the community engagement or community empowerment, and then on the environmental side, water use and biodiversity. So those are the big issues in this area. And in terms of the actors, one thing that was very interesting to us, especially as opposed to some of the other areas we looked at and the other commodities we looked at, is there's quite a lot of activity specifically in this area, and there's a lot of organizations. And so you can see that list. I won't read them out. But so then when we were thinking about the gaps and opportunities, there's definitely an opportunity for greater alignment among the different schemes, and I'm sure that's something, again, we'll hear about from the panelists, is how they're aligning. We know that's happening. And then also this need for a robust integrated certification process. There's sort of similar points in that just having more of a clear view of how the certifications play together, and what can be certified along the steps of the supply chain is an opportunity that we see. So with that, I will turn it over to our next panelist. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Tara, for the presentation and also for the great work that you and your team have done on the guide. I will pass it now to the experts. So first, Dr. Fiona Solomon will give a brief introduction of the Responsible Jewelry Council and their work in the jewelry sector, and then answer a few questions. Fiona?
Yes, thanks, Eleanor, and thanks everyone for joining us. And this is a great opportunity to talk a little bit about our work in both gold and diamonds. Can we move to the first slide? Great. So RJC was established in 2005 with actually the sole purpose of promoting responsible business through our standards and certification programs, which cover gold, diamonds, and also platinum group metals, though not as much of a focus as those first two. As an organisation, we're a member of the ICL Alliance, which is an association for sustainability standards. So we aim to comply with their codes of good practice on things like standard setting, the assurance framework that we carry out, as well as measuring impacts and monitoring and evaluating our programs. We're also a participant in the UN Global Compact, so thanks for involving us in this program and also in the traceability guide that Tara just ran us through as well. In terms of our standards and certification program, we actually have two main platforms. Our core foundation is one that we call the Code of Practices, and it covers standards for business management. It covers human rights, responsible supply chains, the usual labour rights issues, health, safety, environment, specific product disclosure issues at a consumer level and business to business that relate to gold and diamonds, and we have a whole section in our standard on responsible mining. We then developed, for the purposes of this webinar, the focus really is on the second standard around chain of custody certification, and that's our traceability mechanism. With that standard, we've aimed to set a framework of really strong management systems for managing chain of custody between the exchange of materials through business and within a business itself. It integrates risk assessments around conflict-sensitive sourcing following the OECD due diligence guidance and how chain of custody can be implemented within a business. Next slide, thanks. So RJC is a membership organisation. We have members that cover the entire supply chain of these materials, right from mining, producers, through to retailers. And that includes gold refining. On the diamond side, it includes diamond trading, cutting and polishing, jewellery manufacturing, watch manufacturing, as well as retailing, which most of you would be familiar with. Trade associations can also join the RJC, and that membership is also about outreach of RJC standards to their own respective memberships and constituencies in different markets and regions of the world. And moving on to the next slide, which I think is the questions. Yes, thanks. Eleanor, did you want to? Yeah.
Yes. Fiona, thank you very much for the introduction. And as we had prepared a few questions to dig more into your work, you were just saying that you are, a membership organizations working with a good number of companies that work at different levels in sourcing those commodities and precious minerals. So what have been the main challenges that you've seen your members struggling with to achieve a conflict-free supply chain? And you as an organization, what type of support have you offered your members to overcome those challenges?
Okay, so thanks, Elena. So with the first part of the question relating to what are the issues or the challenges of putting in place any kind of traceable supply chain or chain of custody program, and in this case, the question revolves around conflict-free, there needs to be, a sequencing of that. If you're relying on the claims of your suppliers from upstream in the supply chain, obviously those upstream entities need to be doing that work first in order to kind of pass those claims on down through the supply chain. So the work we've been focusing on with our chain of custody standard has been very much first with refiners. For those familiar with the OECD due diligence guidance, the focus of that for those minerals, tin, tungsten, tantalum, as well as gold, is the concept that refiners and smelters are a choke point in the supply chain, being both close to the mines where material is sourced from, also recyclable material, particularly for gold, which constitutes, Terry can correct me, but maybe 40 to 50% of gold supply comes from recycled material, and then passing those claims on about conflict-free and conflict-sensitive sourcing onto their own customers, whether that be finance markets, manufacturing, and so on. So at the moment, within the chain of custody standard, we have, I think, 12 chain of custody certified refiners. That continues to grow, and in fact, the refining forum, if you recall from the previous slide, the various forums that we have, is one of the fastest growing forums that we have. And the driver for that, of course, is that refiners are increasingly expected to demonstrate the due diligence that they're exerting towards their supply chains, and RJC offers a standard for that to happen. We do have some brands that are looking at COC certification, and now that there are some refiners to choose from, are now in the position, of course, to source that material and start to put in place processes in which they manage that within their own production facilities and on through to retail. So we're hoping to have something to announce on that early in the new year. But it's easier, of course, for companies that control a lot more of their production in-house. So some some brands do that. Others would have much more complex series of suppliers that may change from design to month to year, and taking a chain of custody approach through those is obviously, orders of magnitude more complex, and of course that's mirrored in a range of other industries as well. Another aspect, I guess, for downstream companies, particularly in the jewellery sector, although again probably similar in other sectors, is that most companies aren't very keen to differentiate their product range between, say, the jewellery in this cabinet has a known chain of custody, or it has positive claims around conflict-free, whereas this other case over here, we don't know yet. That's a difficult kind of consumer message, so that sort of on-product type of claims is unlikely to happen, although some companies are looking at it, but it is unlikely to happen because most companies want to be able to say, you walk into my store, everything is known. But achieving, of course, that kind of step change is complex when you have multiple suppliers and complex supply chains. So that provides an additional, I think, barrier as well. And so at the same time, there are a number of companies that are realigning their gold sourcing to refiners that have undergone various audit programs, but those efforts aren't necessarily being publicly communicated because they're part of a longer plan to which they reach a point at which this is something that they're ready to kind of talk about publicly. To the second part, in terms of what type of support we offer as part of being a member of the RJC, we have a range of publicly available guidance and so on, but we also provide training and workshops and a help desk program for any questions that people have around implementing the standard and interpretation and so on. We've also been involved as an organisation, as has Terry World Gold Council, in the development of the OECD due diligence guidance to provide input from a jewellery supply chain perspective about how production material flows happen and to make sure that it's relevant and implementable. We've also been involved on the diamond side at a multi-stakeholder group that's been looking at conflict issues for precious stones, so for coloured stones and diamonds, and whether the model like the OECD due diligence guidance might be applicable in those sectors as well. So we've been trying to also be involved in that sort of policy side and thinking, I think, to Tara's earlier point about what sort of collaborative initiatives can be brought together and making sure that the various initiatives that are out there are working together to recognise each other and to make sure they're interoperable as well. So next slide maybe, Eleanor.
And just to go a bit more specifically, Fiona, thank you for your answer. And to look at more specifically at one commodity now, at diamonds, you mentioned before that RGC has this code of practices and diamonds are included in there, but has all done the development of the chain of custody standard for diamond. And could you explain why is that, and what do you think are the main challenges for traceability for diamonds?
Yes. So yes, when we were initially developing the chain of custody standard in 2010 to 2011, we had envisaged it to cover diamonds and precious metals in the same way that our code of practices did. But as we were going through the process, and of course as I'm sure you'd all understand, the supply chains are very different, and where we were looking to have a reasonably common approach, there were aspects that were different in the COC standard that we have now. There are some specific requirements for gold refiners, for example, and likewise we had some specific aspects around diamond trading in the draft standards that we had for public comment. But as we were coming to past the second round of consultation on the standard, there was still some concern around how it was going to work in the diamond side. So a decision was sort of taken to split them, to move forward with gold, and I took note of Tara's point about making sure you have a focus. We decided to focus on precious metals. There were some really critical regulatory drivers at the time and still currently with things like the Dodd-Frank Act and so on, and the work of the OECD in this area. So we wanted to make sure that that standard wasn't held up and was made available and rolled out in the precious metals, particularly gold sector. We have, not forgotten diamonds, of course, and when we were reviewing the RJC Code of Practices, we introduced a new provision in there in a responsible supply chain section called provenance claims. And why we did that was that For one, not everybody is in the position to implement chain of custody. We've set a fairly high bar for how that would work under the RJC standard, but there are also simpler types of claims around provenance of materials that might relate to sourcing from particular refiners, whether they be RJC or maybe London Bullion Market Association or ConflictFree Sourcing Initiative or other kind of OECD type audit of refiners, in order to provide that information for regulatory compliance purposes to downstream customers that might, for example, be impacted by the Dodd-Frank Act. And people were looking for a mechanism to show that those kinds of more general claims were valid. And so we introduced this provenance claim provision. It's about provenance, so it's about traceability in one sense, but we're not prescribing a particular traceability model. In the chain of custody standard, what we have, if you think back to Tara's table of the kinds of models there are, is that we require a product segregation model that's bulk commodity. So materials can come from a number of different eligible sources. They could all be seen as what we call COC gold, but you have to keep COC gold separate from non-COC. Under a provenance claims provision, maybe you're making a claim that X% of your sourcing is from somewhere or other, or that if you're looking at diamonds, there's been an issue within diamond supply chains, a concern that synthetic diamonds, which are in fact chemically identical to diamonds, it's just that they're manufactured in a laboratory environment at high temperature and high pressure, that those kinds of diamonds, which are manufactured at much cheaper rates than mined diamonds, were being kind of salted into diamond supply chains. So companies are introducing a kind of due diligence process that involves due diligence of suppliers. It also involves testing of stones at sampling or perhaps full sampling rates, and these are the kinds of claims that were being put down supply chains. So the provenance claim provision in the Code of Practices, in a way, provides a space to kind of pilot or to kind of see what sort of market response there is in terms of what types of claims are happening in those supply chains, as well as for gold, which we expected would have much more of a compliance-driven focus. So, it's not something we've ruled out in the future, but at the moment we have that provenance claims provision in there for people to sort of test the water in how traceability and chain of custody type claims are going to work in the diamond supply chain. In terms of what challenges there are for diamonds, I think that the things that we've tended to hear through the consultative processes that we've had, and also the work of the Precious Stones multi-stakeholder working group that I mentioned previously, is that the existence of a major initiative like the Kimberley Process Certification Scheme is seen as enough, for the industry at the time. That was seen to be, and was, I think, acknowledged at the time by many stockholders to be, very innovative and a very important step forward in terms of the multi-stakeholder process. Obviously, there are a number of stakeholders who now have concerns as to how that's working, but for many in the industry that are at an operational level, this is something that's seen as managing issues such as conflict, and that conflict is the primary issue that needs to be managed. I think a second issue is that there are actually some interesting proprietary programs for chain of custody for diamonds, such as Canada Mark and Forever Mark. These are branded programs of individual companies, and so I think there was some kind of commercial concern as well as to how a separate standard such as under RJC would intersect with and interact with that when that was already working well. And then I think the final concern in the diamond cutting and trading sector particularly was that implementation of traceability might be complex, and I think that came from concerns perhaps that it would be an identity preservation model that would be difficult to implement. It wasn't what we were proposing, but people still fear that that would be the kinds of expectations that would emerge, and that also, coming back to my earlier point about sort of a step change, that in the middle of the supply chain there was also concerns that retailer and manufacturer demand would exceed supply, and that either they as a manufacturer would be under pressure to kind of provide goods that were all traced in a step change situation, or that that others might be under similar pressure, and that the system might be distorted because would the controls be good enough to prevent their competitors from saying, sure, you want these kinds of goods, these are these kinds of goods. So I think these are some of the concerns around how that would work in diamonds. It's quite a unique industry. It's a lot smaller than gold. I think it will just take a little bit more working through some of these others to sort of think about those next steps. That's it from me, Fiona.
Thank you. Thank you very much to you, Fiona, and hopefully we can talk more about the work of the RJC during the Q&A session. I will give now the floor to Terry Heyman to briefly provide an overview of the World Gold Council and the ConflictFree Gold Standard, and then he also will talk and answer a few questions. To you, Terry.
Thank you very much, Elena, and really appreciate the opportunity to participate. Thanks to the UNGC for organising this. So if we just go to the slide about the World Gold Council, I thought it might be helpful to just, for those people on the call who aren't familiar with us, talk about the World Gold Council and what we do. So next slide, please. The World Gold Council is the market development organisation for the gold industry, and really we're focused on demand. We're focused on stimulating and sustaining demand for gold, and most of our efforts and focus has been around areas where people buy gold, buy it as jewellery, buy it as investment, working with central banks who obviously buy gold as part of their reserves. I think what's quite interesting for us as an organisation is we have moved into looking at issues related to responsible sourcing because of that recognition that consumers and purchasers of gold increasingly recognise these areas as important, and increasingly are looking for the mining community and indeed the entire gold supply chain to help and provide confidence that gold has been sourced in a responsible manner. So I think that as an organisation it's been quite a journey for us, and recognises and reflects the increasing prominence of responsible sourcing across supply chains, and the fact that there are many different dimensions that come into play when thinking about what constitutes responsible sourcing and indeed responsible mining. The particular area that I'd like to talk about today is the ConflictFree Gold Standard. So if we move on to the next slide, please. The ConflictFree Gold Standard is an initiative that we developed working very closely with our member companies. We are a membership organisation, and our members are the world's leading gold mining companies. And we put in place and developed with the members a standard that sets out a common approach that allows gold producers to really provide confidence that their gold is not contributing to conflict. And by conflict we mean unlawful armed conflicts or contributing to serious human rights abuses or breaches of international humanitarian law. And I would say this very much builds on to existing standards around responsible mining, be it in the fields of environmental management, health and safety, and a whole range of issues that, quite rightly, the mining industry is looking at and paying attention to. One area that there hadn't been as much focus on historically, at least in the gold sector, was this area around conflict. And that's why we, under the direction of our members and working closely with them, led the development of this particular standard, really looking to take a proactive stance on addressing concerns that might link gold mining to the financing of armed conflicts. That's clearly something that the gold mining industry doesn't want to be associated with, and wants to go and be proactive in demonstrating that gold is sourced and can be sourced in a way that's not linked to unlawful armed conflict. It's also about operationalizing the OECD guidance, and what some of the themes that have come up already during this conversation have been around the meshing together of different initiatives and the synchronization. Well, the OECD guidance is very much the high-level guidance, I would say, for all minerals about responsible sourcing from conflict-affected areas. Our standard really sets out step by step what it means for gold mining companies, and is very much a how-to guide. As so, it's intended to promote responsible mining and indeed encourage investment in conflict-affected areas where it is appropriately undertaken. And I think that's a really important piece about this whole work. We are looking to support responsible gold mining in conflict-affected areas, recognizing that if it is undertaken in a responsible manner, gold mining has huge potential to lead to positive social and economic development and change, And in all areas, and in particular in conflict-affected areas, there's a need for social and economic development, and particularly in conflict-affected areas, that's important as those places look to develop economies that will help them build and move on from being conflict-affected. Again, just linking it to different standards, there are a number of different approaches for different parts of the supply chain in the gold sector. Our standard very much focuses on mining. The LBMA, which is the London Bullion Market Association, is the predominant organization looking at refining of gold, and their responsible gold guidance is designed for refiners. Our standard aligns with theirs to make that transition very smooth from miner to refiner. So that's really all I wanted to say as an introduction. We can move on to the next slide and on to some of the questions. Elena, do you want me to have a go at answering this?
Sorry, Terry. I didn't unmute myself. I wanted to just ask you a question directly on the conflict-free gold standard, and we understand that it was recently developed and implemented for the first time last year, and just ask you, with the other existing standards out there and even resources, what has been the kind of inspiration that you have drawn from existing standards, and even what has been helpful to you to develop then your own conflict-free gold standard?
Sure. So thank you. And I think we've taken a lot of lessons learned and indeed references to various other standards from, as I talked about, those that are particularly focused on conflict-affected, responsible sourcing in conflict-affected areas like the OECD guidance, and designed our standard to operationalize that OECD guidance for gold mining companies. But in the standard itself, rather than start from scratch, we've really built the standard from lots of existing initiatives that speak to aspects of what is generally regarded, what constitutes responsible mining in conflict-affected areas. So let me just run through how the standard works and examples of the types of other standards or approaches that we've drawn on. The first part of the conflict-free gold standard is a conflict assessment, and actually understanding whether you are operating in a conflict-affected area. That draws on existing approaches like the use of international sanctions. It also draws on well-recognized reference points in terms of recognizing conflict and some of the publications that are available that undertake detailed work looking at whether particular areas should be considered as conflict-affected. The second part of the conflict-free gold standard is, if you are in a conflict-affected area, do you have the corporate procedures in place? What is the company assessment? And this company assessment draws on lots of existing standards. So, for example, it draws on the voluntary principles relating to security and human rights, and requires companies to have those kinds of systems in place, again, if they are operating in a conflict-affected area. It looks at other standards, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, clearly a leading standard in this field, and is incorporated in the body of what is considered required as part of that company assessment, that corporate assessment. And there are a number of other standards and initiatives that are included in our standard, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative being another good example, and various other existing standards that have been pooled together. And what I think the standard does well, and we did extensive consultation on this, and this was an area that we got very positive feedback on, was rather than try and invent a new wheel and build something from scratch, find a way to integrate existing standards into a comprehensive, integrated approach that looks at one particular issue, namely conflict, design it in a way that makes it straightforward for companies to implement. Clearly there's work to do, but it's clear what companies need to do, and then put in place strong disclosure and external assurance requirements that actually means that users of this report, customers, interested parties can have confidence that if a company says it's conforming with the standard, and therefore by definition conforming with all the underlying standards, those people can have confidence in it because of that disclosure and external assurance. So I think that's kind of a response to that question. Happy to move on to the next slide and additional questions.
Thank you very much, Terry. I will move right directly to the next question and the next slide. So I understand that your standard is intended to support companies that have operation or that intend to make investments in a fragile or conflict-affected environment. And now, because we will also have then the presentation from Business for Peace, would like to ask you, how do you balance the need for increased precautions when extracting for these conflict-affected areas, and then the risk that member companies would avoid those areas altogether?
So I think the concerns that companies might avoid conflict-affected areas is very real, and certainly there have been a number of voices raised around potential for de facto embargo from some conflict-affected areas, and a lot of those focused on the Democratic Republic of Congo, which of course has been the focus of second to the Dodd-Frank Act. I think in our approach, we have deliberately taken a global approach.
I'm sorry, Terry, we cannot hear you very well. I don't know if there's a problem with the audio. I don't know if you changed the position or device. So I didn't
No, I haven't. Can you hear me now?
Yes, just a bit of an echo, sorry. Please continue.
Okay. So just to say, our standard has been designed on a global basis, and I think that requiring companies to make the determination globally helps avoid stigmatization, helps avoid a concern about linking a specific country or a specific area to conflict and therefore saying it's easier just to withdraw. At the same time, we are very clear in saying the standard is designed to support responsible mining in conflict-affected areas. And I think there's an important reason and rationale for doing that. And I think beyond the mining community, there's a real need for the rest of the gold supply chain to make considered choices around how and where they source their gold from, and recognize that just avoiding a conflict-affected area, if gold can be produced in a responsible manner, and of course gold needs to be produced in a responsible manner, can actually lead to harmful impacts in that particular area. So mining companies make very long time frame decisions and factor in a number of considerations when deciding where to invest. Purchases of gold are much more transactional, and therefore I think it's greater leverage to be able to support and encourage responsible mining in conflict-affected areas, as long as that mining can be shown to be responsible.
Thank you again, Terry. We will move right away. We are a bit over time. We are now going to move to the next presentation. So as Tara mentioned before, we're talking about all minerals here, but we're moving now from precious minerals to other kind with a presentation by Arvind Pandey, General Manager of ArcelorMittal. And again, we will have a quick introduction of ArcelorMittal's work on conflict minerals, and then move to a couple of questions. Arvind, to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, Arvind, we can hear you, yes.
Very good. Good morning and good afternoon, and thank you very much for this opportunity. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Quick overview on ArcelorMittal. We are a leading steel and mining company, and we supply steel to major markets in automotive construction and household appliance and packaging. We are present in almost 60 countries with a footprint of in 20 countries, and we spend around $50 billion in our supply chain, which also includes raw materials, services, and other products. Alongside this, we also have an organization in place for to support the conflict mineral policy that we have. And one of the main goals that we have is to produce and supply safe, sustainable steel. How do we do it? To the next slide, please. So to promote this, we have a code of responsible sourcing that we have put in place, which is strengthened by a responsible sourcing guidance. And we have, this was drawn in 2010, and we had collaboration and invitation input from our customers, suppliers, peers, companies, including the NGO. We also have online training program in place. We have around 1,200 buyers across the world, and it is important that we put this program in place. And to monitor this, we have a KPIs that we have put in place, and there are 3 KPIs that we look at: what are the number of training that we have completed, and the number of suppliers who have received this code and who have acknowledged the code. Next slide, please. So we wanted to give you one concrete case on conflict mineral, and essentially the 2 conflict minerals, which are tin and tungsten, which we use but not in a great amount for our steel products. But these are the 2 products that is essential in our company. And for this, we had put in a conflict mineral program management system. Then we identified the risk in our supply chain, and we have put together a strong risk management program. And since ArcelorMittal is a listed company, and we were also we had to be regulatory to a Dodd-Frank Act, we had all the suppliers identified and assessed in 2014 with 100% response rate. And therefore, we had to file the SEC filing in June, which we performed in time. So, Elena?
Yes, Arvind, thank you very much. And we'll pass now to the next slide for your question. So from a business perspective, now that we have you, we wanted to ask, having gone through some of the processes yourself, and you were mentioning your work on conflict minerals, what advice would you give to other companies who want to trace their commodities and achieve a conflict-free supply chain?
First of all, I'll start by saying that we are still learning and improving our processes. But having said that, few advices that we can give. This is based on our experience that we have had, because we put together a conflict mineral program in our company just 2 years back. And so based on experience, I can just give some advice is on engagement. It is extremely important that we engage our internal and external stakeholders, which is based on international bodies and different forums. We have put together such a procedure and policies in place in 2013. And one thing that we did, which might be helpful to the other companies, is that in our contract clauses, we have put together a responsible sourcing code, the good health and safety, environment, social and ethical program. And we have also made it integral to, since we have made it integral to our contract, we do make an assessment, and which is mandatory. So the other is to work in partnership with our suppliers. Without being in partnership with supplier, I don't think we'll be able to achieve any of the goals that we are setting ourselves to. To choose a well-respected framework, rely on recognized standards to deal with conflict mineral. We relied on, like the other speaker said, we have relied also on the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible sourcing chain and for minerals from conflict affected and high risk areas. These standards are not only helpful, only because they are usually nationally and internationally recognized, but also because they will give you a framework which is interesting and to keep the companies and the people focused. Other interesting, important point probably will be to educate the colleagues. When I say colleagues, it's both the buyers and the suppliers and almost all the stakeholders in the supply chain. They must know the importance of traceability, and in particular the employees in charge of buying the raw materials. I have mentioned here centralized purchasing, by which I really mean is that the purchasing should be done from a single source. by which it will be easier to have a control from. Imagine a company like ArcelorMittal, where we are in so many different countries and we have 1,200 buyers each. Each one of them start acting on his own. There's no way we'll be able to even fulfill our mandatory requirements or the goal that we have set up ourselves to. Other point that I would probably suggest is to allow yourself time. There'll be a lot of pressure from different bodies, but we do need time to put in a good program, policies, procedures which works in place. And especially when it comes to cases like conflict mineral, we need to understand, although there are deadlines, there will be unexpected events. We'll have suppliers not answering quickly because probably they have not understood what they need to do, or they're afraid to give information. So at the end, transparency is important in supply chain, but this transparency will only come when we allow ourselves time and engage. And the last point I would probably say is to challenge the status quo. Since the supply chain is constantly evolving, changing, so you can also be able to adapt yourself to these changes. Elena? Hello?
Hi, Arvind. I'm sorry. Thank you for sharing your experience on such an important topic, and where many companies actually are getting started, and it is very helpful to other companies that are hearing us and will hear us to also learn from your experience. And now for the second question, it was like you started, you said 3 years back, to work on traceability and conflict minerals. And what are the benefits that you've seen as a company since you started doing so, and why also did you get started in getting involved on traceability?
Okay. I think one of the interests that probably every company, and we also have, is that we need to operate a lean supply chain. And when I mean lean supply chain, it also should support the company's policies related to responsible sourcing or any other policies, ethical or human rights, all that the company says. It is, unless we operate a lean supply chain, and then it should be supported by good policies. So that is the reason why we have that in place. And this is in interest because this is one of the goals that we have mentioned, is that we have to not only produce but sell sustainable steel. Then to develop sourcing solution in line with the customer. There are customers and there are regulatory and wide stakeholders needs and expectations. To give you an example, we sell steel and we have major customers in take example of automotive customers. And they also have a requirement from us that the steel that they're buying is conflict-free. So it is in our interest to improve traceability. Unless we have the traceability in place, we'll not be able to tell them that the steel that they're buying is conflict-free. Then the other interest is to create long-term value, therefore reducing risk to our businesses. Not only us, if we reduce risk to our businesses, it's also to our suppliers and to our stakeholders. Again, I've mentioned again, it's important to mention, is we must meet the expectation of our customer. That is why we are here because of our customers, and it is essential that we meet their expectations. We have some environment and social benefits also associated with this, and there's a reputation at stake. So we need to maintain our reputation, and at the end of it, we have all this leads to a very good informed decisions. So if we have full traceability, we can make informed decisions. And we certainly believe that we can make a positive influence on our suppliers by engaging with them on social, ethical, and environment aspects of their businesses.
Thank you very much. And I'll just pass quickly again to Business for Peace, and then I imagine we will have only time for the special remarks rather than the Q&A session. So we've heard before about how traceability can ensure that business invest and source responsibly from fragile or conflict-affected countries. And we will hear now from the work that the Global Compact is also doing to explore the role of business in contributing to peace through the Business for Peace initiative. So Adrian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you everyone for your very insightful presentations. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to highlight the new Business for Peace platform to your knowledge as it has been launched last year, and to give you a little bit of the key features of this new platform that I believe is very much related to the work that you are all doing. Next slide. So the Business for Peace platform has been established after over a decade of work of the Global Compact with companies that are operating in high-risk and conflict-affected areas, where we have worked to help them integrate conflict sensitivity in their approach, in their policies and strategies, and where we have facilitated multi-stakeholder dialogue in order to help everyone to better understand what the impacts of business are in such environments and how business can make a positive contribution to this environment. Over the past few years, we've developed a number of resources, and the most important one is the guidance on responsible business in conflict-affected and high-risk areas that we have developed with an expert group, which highlights the key things or the key points on which believe are business is believed to be able to act in order to ensure that they are not having negative impact and to enhance their positive contribution. Further to that, we have worked with a group of companies and investors on a pilot project to kind of road test this guidance, and we have developed what we call a resource package with examples. Then what was quite interesting for us was to hear from these very engaged companies that they wanted to take the next step in this effort and to take action that go beyond a do no harm approach and to actively engage for peace. And this is the background, the reason why the Business for Peace platform has been launched. The platform is dedicated to help the Global Compact participants to operationalize their commitment to the Global Compact 10 principles in high-risk and conflict-affected areas of the world, as a way to respond to the complexity of integrating sustainability throughout company policies and strategies and into their supply chain in this specific challenging environments. The second goal of the platform is to assist companies in taking action to support UN goals. It's very much aligned to the second goal of the Global Compact. And obviously, here it is about helping business to work with the UN to achieve or at least advance peace as our core objective. The platform is built on the model that we call commit, act, and report. This is a model to which the Business for Peace participants commit when they join the initiative, which means that they commit to act. They commit to support peace in their activities, meaning that they will adjust their policies and strategies and also engage in projects in partnership with other stakeholders to advance peace, and that they will report mainly through their communication on the progress to share learning and what they have done in this respect. So the whole platform is very much designed to conduct what we call a learning journey to understand better through practice what works, what doesn't work, and how business can make a positive contribution to peace. The Business for Peace platform, next slide, sorry, has now over 100 companies that have joined the initiative, and also 17 local networks in various countries and regions of the world. That's a platform that is advanced, that is joined by companies from different sectors, and that is very much driven by our local partners, the local network. What we are doing together with the local network and with the Business for Peace participants is to advance a range of awareness raising and outreach activities, as we feel that we need to mainstream the importance of responsible business practice in high-risk and conflict-affected areas as widely as possible in order to inspire business leaders to take up this challenge and to advance the objective of the platform. The platform is designed to promote sharing of learning and good practice and a better understanding, as I said, of how to contribute to peace, with the view to build over time a community of practice of committed business leaders who will on a regular basis share their experiences. There will be a focus on promoting transparency and accountability through the annual reporting requirement of the Global Compact, the communication and the progress, and we expect over time that this wealth of information will help us to better identify the most impactful ways in which the private sector can contribute to peace. Finally, the platform will also serve to recognize leadership and to showcase actions that will have been taken by business leaders in support of peace. So this is in a nutshell what the Business for Peace platform is and is seeking to achieve. And obviously there's a very close link to this traceability discussion, as in many instances minerals and diamonds and such high-value resources are to be found in unstable regions. This means that traceability might be difficult to establish, as all of you have said. And we feel that developing a clear picture of the supply chain and better understanding how a company connects with the various actors in a specific context, especially these high-risk and conflict-affected environments, is key so that a company can better appreciate its impacts, but also so that it can better understand how it can engage and have a positive effect on peace in a specific context. So we feel that traceability is an essential step to build a strong and meaningful engagement for peace, and we will be very happy to work together with you on the Business for Peace platform to highlight your learning and to spread them widely.
Thank you very much, Adrienne, and we hope as well there will be opportunities to collaborate in the future. Now we are almost over time. There will not be time for a Q&A session, but definitely we want to have time for special remarks from Barrick Gold. And we have heard, from the World Gold Council and the RJC on the work that they are doing on gold. And now we are lucky to have a business perspective on the same commodity from Barrick Gold, the leading mining company. Barrick Gold is a member of the World Gold Council and as such has participated to the ConflictFree gold standards. And I believe the company also works closely with Business for Peace. Now, Jonathan, thank you very much, first of all, for your patience. And, just to close this up, I wanted to ask you, as a company that has participated in this process in the ConflictFree gold standard and is committed to source gold responsibly, what is your interest in pursuing traceability? What has motivated you in pursuing traceability? And, to wrap it all up also, what would you like to see in terms of traceability for your commodity in the future? Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Anita, and I'll be quick, appreciating our limited time. I mean, our interest, and this has been alluded to by prior speakers, we want to help ensure that our products, and this is true of the gold industry and others in the extractive sector, aren't contributing to human rights violations. We want to help meet the demands of consumers and downstream customers, as well as meet growing legal demands and norms that continue to apply to our value chains. We also want to ensure that our value chains do meet our core values, and our approach. And in the end, as referenced, we are participants, active participants in the Business for Peace platform, and we hope through our operations that we are bringing responsible investment and stability to the places where we operate, and not undermining it through the foreseeable misuse of our products. And so our interest in traceability are commercial reasons, they're reputational reasons, both for us and for our industry. There are legal reasons, and it's part of our core values and our core approach to business. I mean, I will say, though, as we think about looking forward, the work that Terry has done, in particular in the World Gold Council, has really been tremendous, and I applaud him for that effort. And having worked with him and seen the effort he's put in, the conflict-free gold standard is a product that I think it does present a real roadmap in terms of the future from a traceability standpoint, not just on the conflict area. I mean, I do think it is critically important that industry groups do continue to take the lead in defining these types of standards, because, as Terry alluded to, nobody knows our businesses like we do. It's obviously important to have transparent processes, to have a degree of insurance, to have complaint mechanisms, and that a variety of stakeholder views are taken into account in developing this approach. But in the end, we, in our industries, in the places and groups in which we operate, we're the best positioned to figure out what the risks are and how best to integrate the different initiatives that we adhere to, whether it's the voluntary principles or others, and how ultimately, in the end, we can meet the 10 principles of the Global Compact through the standards that we set and the operations that we have. So again, from the increasing the voluntary standards and initiatives through industry is the place where I think the most work can ultimately be done down the road.
Thank you very much for your conclusion, Jonathan. And it's actually also what has been said in the guide, that collaboration is key, and so the importance of collaborating with other peer industries and industry groups and joining other standards. So thank you very much for this last perfect note. Thank you to all the panelists for participating in the webinar, and apologies to the audience. We've been receiving many questions, and unfortunately we are over time for the Q&A session, but we have taken notes of the question, and we will forward them to the panelists if they can provide, if they have the capacity to provide an answer, and we will try to reply separately to all of you. Next slide, please. Remember also that there will be a video recording, a meeting report as well, and the presentation slides of this webinar that will be available in due course on the UN Global Compact website. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you very much to you all, and have a good rest of the day or the night, wherever you are.